The 2024 Formula 1 World Championship was arguably one of the best seasons of the 21st century, as although there wasn't really a title fight, let's be honest here, there were still memorable moments throughout the field, particularly McLaren's rise to being Constructors' Champions, to Leclerc showing why he's potentially the second best driver on the grid behind Max Verstappen, to even the interesting fight for 6th in the Constructors between Alpine, Haas and VCARB. And one of the drivers who was part of that battle proved a lot of people wrong throughout 2024 and even the previous year in 2023. That driver of course being Nico Hulkenberg, who throughout the 2024 season played a key role in Haas's revival as being a solid midfield contender, with him being a constant point scorer, which was enough to bag him 11th in the championship, only just missing out on the top 10 finish to Pierre Gasly, thanks to the Frenchman's podium at Interlagos. But for however brilliant Nico's 2024 season was, one thing that has always eluded him in his entire career has been a podium finish. The German has come close on many occasions to grab his first ever podium, but circumstances have always prevented him from making it a reality. And with him returning to Sauber in 2025 on a multi-year deal, it looks like that wait will continue for a while longer, even into 2026 when they become Audi, given the rumours that the Audi engine is expected to be the worst on the grid, similar to how Honda was when they made their return in 2015. So in this video, and as requested over a year ago by fellow content creator and good friend of the channel, the Moaning Yorkshireman, I thought I would go through Nico's missed opportunities, specifically the main ones where he came close but no cigar. So no mention of Brazil 2010, Italy 2013 or even Austria 2016, as even though he qualified very high on the grid, Brazil in particular where he took to date his only ever pole position, ultimately he didn't have the pace in either of those races to grab a podium. There are 5 on this list, and the first one from earliest to latest is the one that everyone remembers, the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix. The 2012 Formula 1 World Championship was arguably one of the greatest ever seasons Formula 1 ever produced, and is personally my favourite Formula 1 season of all time. Who knows, maybe I'll make a video about it one day. The season saw a record 7 different winners in the first 7 races, with it becoming 8 in Abu Dhabi thanks to a returning Kimi Räikkönen in the Lotus, although him winning the race is not the most memorable thing to come from that Grand Prix unfortunately. It also saw the likes of Michael Schumacher getting his final ever podium in Valencia, along with him setting the fastest qualifying time in Monaco before being demoted 5 places on the grid, as well as the Sauber pairing of Sergio Perez and Kamui Kobayashi getting their first ever podiums in Formula 1, with Kamui getting a hero's welcome by his home fans at Suzuka, whilst Checo would end up having a breakout year, which would lead to him being signed by McLaren for 2013 after Lewis Hamilton took a gamble to move to Mercedes. And it's safe to say the latter of the two got the better move in the end. But more importantly, it also saw a titanic duel for the title between Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso, which seemed unlikely for a while, given the pair of them didn't have the best start to the season due to both the Red Bull and the Ferrari not being up to scratch at the beginning of the season. This culminated in a classic title decider at Interlagos, where after a dramatic race from both the title contenders for different reasons, it was Vettel who pipped Alonso to his 3rd consecutive title, becoming the youngest driver to do so in the process. However, aside from Vettel winning the title, there was also another talking point in that race involving Nico Hulkenberg, who at the time was driving for Force India. Nico would end up having a standout race at Interlagos, however it's safe to say that it could have been a lot more for at the time the 25-year-old German. Starting in 6th, Nico would maintain position at the start, losing a place to Alonso but gaining one on Vettel, who was blocked off by his teammate Mark Webber. A lap later, and after Alonso made his incredible double overtake on both Webber and Massa, thanks in large to Massa giving him assistance, Nico, who was right behind the battle, would take full advantage to go around the outside of Massa, which in turn would turn into the inside at turn 2 to move up into 5th, with him shortly disposing of Webber not too long later. Then, 3 laps later, and with the rain starting to present itself on the circuit, Nico would move up into the podium places after Fernando Alonso would lock up into turn 1 and go off the track, being lucky not to lose any further places to both Webber and Massa. Then, as the conditions worsened, Nico, thanks to his wet weather setup, was able to catch up to the leading McLarens of Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button, with the pair of them swapping places during the crossover from dry to wet. Nico would then move ahead of Hamilton into second during the switch to intermediates, and then when it quickly changed back to dry tyres, Nico, who had kept up with Jenson, would overtake him on the outside into turn 1 to move up into the lead. Nico then drove a commanding race up front, even being able to maintain his lead after the first safety car period, helped as well by Lewis overtaking Jenson again at the restart. However, on lap 49, Nico would make a mistake at turn 8, catching a wet patch on the outside line and sliding his car into a half spin, handing the lead to Hamilton. Nico would get going again, being lucky to only lose 1 place, and would set his sights on catching back up to Hamilton. Then, on lap 55, and with the rain returning to the circuit, Nico, after catching back up, would get onto the back of Lewis down the pit straight and fancied his chances down the inside into turn 1. However, in doing so, Nico, who was on the wet patch, would lose the rear end into turn 1 and hit the side of Lewis's car, ending Lewis's final race with McLaren on a flat note. Nico would get going again, dropping down to second behind Jenson. However, he would end up getting a drive-through penalty for the incident, which saw him in the end finish the race in 5th ahead of eventual champion Sebastian Vettel. The errors that Nico made that day would end up proving costly, as had he kept his car on the island throughout that race, it's safe to say that not only would he have got his first ever podium, but he also would have got his first ever win on the same track that 2 years prior he took his first ever pole position. But like with everything, that's racing, and Nico was left to ponder on what might have been, whilst Force India would have to wait 8 years and also a name change before they finally took their first win since the Jordan days. 2013 would see Nico move to Sauber, where he would not get close to challenging a podium that season, even with the 3rd place starting position that he got at Monza. And it wouldn't be until 2014, when he made his return to Force India, that he would have another chance to grab a podium. The 2014 season would see a massive regulation change, which not only saw the cars drastically change, but also the engine saw a radical change as well, with the 2.4 litre V8 engines being replaced by 1.6 litre V6 turbocharged hybrids. This new engine formula would benefit teams that were powered by a Mercedes engine, with customers to Mercedes, McLaren, Williams and Force India having a huge advantage on the straights. So, when the drivers arrived at Sakhir for the Bahrain Grand Prix, a track known for being mostly a speed-dependent track, it was no surprise that the Mercedes-powered teams would have the advantage. Whilst the Mercedes duo of Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg would have their iconic scrap for the lead, the battle for third was also intense between the 2 Williams of Felipe Massa and Valtteri Bottas and the 2 Force Indias of Sergio Perez and Nico Hulkenberg. After Bottas made his pit stop, Hulkenberg found himself with an opportunity to line Massa up for a pass at turn 4. However, Massa would end up doing a good enough job to defend his position, and with Nico compromising his line at the entrance of turn 4, it allowed his teammate Sergio Perez to take full advantage and take P4 into turn 6. Both the Force Indias would eventually jump the Williams for 3rd and 4th respectively, and after the safety car was brought out due to Pastor Maldonado being Pastor Maldonado, it gave Hulkenberg another opportunity to re-overtake his teammate and grab his first ever podium. Sadly, it wasn't to be, as Perez would have enough pace to pull clear of Nico, and then to add insult to injury, Daniel Ricciardo in the Red Bull would overtake Nico right towards the end of the race. Just like in Brazil, Nico would finish the race in 5th, ironically once again finishing ahead of Vettel. Whilst the first instance was down to him, this instance he just didn't have the pace in the end to overhaul Perez and hold off Ricciardo. And a similar story would occur in the next example at the 2016 Belgian Grand Prix, where after a first lap collision involving the two Ferraris and the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, Hulkenberg, who was still with Force India by this point, would find himself up in second by the end of the first lap, which would later become third after Daniel Ricciardo disposed of him shortly afterwards. Then, just a few laps later, the red flag would be brought out due to Kevin Magnussen losing control of his Renault at the top of Raidillon and crashing into the barrier. Then, at the restart, Nico would maintain P3 despite early pressure from Fernando Alonso. However, a few laps later, Nico would lose the podium place when Hamilton, who was on a charge from 21st on the grid, would blast past him down the Kemmel Straight and pull clear of Nico into the distance. Nico would finish the race 4th in the end, with many arguing that without the red flag, which ended up bunching the whole field, he could have easily have grabbed the final podium spot. But in the end, it was a case of what if, and that would be a similar story for our penultimate example, which came at the 2017 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, as in a race which saw a huge amount of attrition around the Baku City circuit, and also this controversial moment involving the title contenders, many drivers that day could have had a shot at a podium, with one of them, as you might have guessed, being Nico Hulkenberg, who at this point was now driving for Renault. Nico was fighting with the two Williams of Felipe Massa and Lance Stroll, and would be one of the drivers that Daniel Ricciardo would pull a triple overtake on at turn 1. Both Stroll and Hulkenberg would dispose of Massa once Felipe ran into problems, but at the same time when Hulkenberg passed Massa, his future teammate Kevin Magnussen would pull off an overtake on Nico into turn 1. Then, later on in the lap, Nico would be added to the list of names that were caught up in the attrition, as heading into the double apex of turn 7, Nico would turn in a little too early and clip the inside wall, damaging his front right suspension in the process and being forced to retire down the slip road heading into the infamous castle section. Given the likes of Hamilton and Vettel would run into issues of their own, with Sebastian incurring a 10-second stop-go penalty for the collision with Lewis at the safety car restart, as well as Lewis being forced to pit due to a loose headrest, it's unclear whether Hulkenberg would have had enough pace to grab a podium, given that Bottas was charging his way through the order, as well as both Vettel and Hamilton trying to make up for lost ground. But whilst that one was unclear, our final example, which was the most recent, was definitely the most clearest. The 2019 German Grand Prix would play us to what would be at the time of recording the last F1 race to be held at Hockenheim, and there was a sense that it was going to be an exciting race as rain had made its way onto the circuit. A lot of German interest for the race was on Sebastian Vettel, who was looking for redemption after making a championship-defining error the previous year at the Sachs curve. However, he would have to mount a charge through the order as he would start from the back of the grid due to a mechanical issue during qualifying, whilst the other home favourite Nico Hulkenberg would start all the way up in 9th, 4 places ahead of teammate Daniel Ricciardo. Nico would get off to a great start, as he would move up to 5th by the end of lap 1, barging his way past Grosjean into the hairpin. Nico would then get jumped by Charles Leclerc in the pit stop when the safety car came out due to Sergio Perez hitting the wall at the exit of turn 10. Nico would maintain position, even despite a back and forth battle with Kimi Räikkönen. However, as the race progressed, the weather would begin to get worse, with drivers slipping off left, right and centre, including Charles Leclerc and even race leader Lewis Hamilton, both of whom would get caught up by the slippy drag strip on the outside of the last 2 corners. Lewis would be forced to pit for a new front wing, which resulted in chaos in the Mercedes pit box, which in turn also hampered Valtteri Bottas's race, who was forced to stay out an extra lap behind the safety car due to the chaos. This, as a result, lifted Hulkenberg into the podium places, with him being P2 at the restart behind new race leader Max Verstappen. Bottas, who rejoined 3rd once he finally made his pit stop, would eventually overtake Nico a few laps later, But with Lewis having a time penalty for the way he entered the pits, Nico was still looking rosy for his long-awaited first ever podium. However, 3 laps later, Nico would throw it all away, as like with Leclerc, Hamilton and also Sainz previously, Nico would run wide onto the slippy drag strip and spin off into the barrier, ending his race in the process and losing yet another opportunity to grab his first ever podium. As Verstappen took his 7th career win, with Vettel finishing an impressive 2nd and Kvyat a memorable 3rd, Nico was left to ponder on what might have been, as had he kept his car on the island, and given what happened to both Hamilton and Bottas in the race, he undoubtedly would have finally have got his first ever podium. But as it happened, he didn't, and little did we know that that would be the last time to date that Nico would challenge for a podium, as although he would qualify 3rd during his stint as an unofficial reserve driver for Racing Point at the 70th anniversary Grand Prix at Silverstone, he ultimately, like in Brazil 2010, didn't have the pace to challenge the top 3 that day. And ever since making his full-time return to the sport in 2023, he hasn't been anywhere near challenging a podium, and it looks like he won't be for the next couple of years, given he'll be driving for Sauber in 2025, which is set to become Audi in 2026, who are rumoured to have the worst engine on the grid when they make their debut. Unless a massive miracle happens between now and 2026, Nico will probably have to wait until at least 2027 to challenge for a podium again, but even then, that's probably a bit too much of an ask. So they are all of Nico Hulkenberg's lost podium opportunities. Do you think he will ever get a podium in F1, or do you think that time has sadly passed? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in 2 weeks for the next video. Till then, take care.